All right, let's dive right into this explainer with a scenario that honestly feels like it was ripped straight out of a dark, intense cinematic thriller. I want you to picture this for a second. It's March 1974. The rest of the world has completely moved on from the devastation of World War II. Peace has spread, cities have been totally rebuilt, and an entire new generation has grown up. But hidden away in a dense, unforgiving jungle, there's a single soldier who is still fighting. His uniform is practically in tatters, but his rifle and his sword, they are meticulously polished. He is literally still waging a war that the rest of the planet finished 29 years ago. To really wrap your head around this, we have to look at the massive contrast between these two realities. Out in the world in 1974, people are driving modern cars, they're watching color TV, they're looking ahead to the future. But inside the jagged, terrifying wilderness of Lubang Island in the Philippines, it's like time just stopped. For this lone man, the calendar was permanently stuck in 1944. He believed with absolute certainty that enemy forces were still actively hunting him. He was convinced that the second he stepped out of that jungle, he'd be captured or killed. For decades, he was essentially a ghost. And we're not talking about some lost civilian here. This was an intelligence officer of the Japanese Imperial Army. He moved completely invisibly through the thick forests, surviving totally unseen by the modernizing world just outside the trees. He had zero supply chains, no backup, no communication with his homeland. It is almost unimaginable, right? How does a human being sustain that level of total isolation and hypervigilance for nearly 3 decades?
And that brings us to the absolutely unbelievable premise of this story. This man, Hiro Onoda, was still actively waging a private war against American and Allied forces entirely in his own mind. While everyone else was celebrating peace and moving on, Onoda was plotting, he was hiding, and he was surviving. Technically speaking, a war doesn't truly end until the last soldier lays down their arms. But it really makes you wonder, was this an incredible display of duty, or just a tragic, unyielding stubbornness that essentially made him World War II's final prisoner?
Section 1. A Ghost in the Jungle and the Mindset of 1944. Section 2. The Ultimate Order at the Nakano Military School.
Okay, so what's really interesting here is understanding why he stayed. Hiro Onoda was born in 1922, and he grew up in a highly militarized society where the concept of surrender practically didn't exist. Dying in battle was vastly preferred over the ultimate disgrace of giving up. So when he finished his elite military training, his commanding officer looked him dead in the eye and gave him this ultimate non-negotiable order. You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we'll come back for you. That specific command became the psychological anchor that trapped him in the jungle. Those words lit a fire in him that literally wouldn't burn out for another 29 years.
Armed with that directive, plus some incredibly intense guerrilla warfare and intelligence training, Onoda was deployed to Lubang Island in 1944. This was a small, densely forested island, but it was strategically huge because it was a supply route for Allied forces. His mission parameters? Crystal clear: disrupt and destroy. He was ordered to launch stealth attacks, monitor the enemy, and basically turn every square inch of that jungle into a living hell. And, crucially, he was told to hold his post until the army returned for him, no matter what.
Moving on to Section 3. 29 years of isolation, surviving Lubang Island.
So just 1 year into his deployment, the entire world shifts on its axis. August 1945 hits, the atomic bombs are dropped, and Japan officially surrenders. The war is over. The Allied forces actually knew there were guerrilla holdouts out there, so they flew over the jungles and dropped thousands of leaflets announcing the surrender, basically begging these guys to come down from the mountains. But here's where that elite intelligence training really backfired. Onoda was taught that the enemy was incredibly cunning, that they'd use fake news and psychological tricks to flush him out. So he finds these leaflets, looks at them, and his training totally takes over. He's absolutely convinced it's an elaborate trap. To him, until his specific commander said otherwise, the war was still very much on.
So, how exactly do you survive for nearly 30 years without a roof, without any official rations, and constantly feeling like you're on the run? The day-to-day reality of his survival was incredibly gritty. Onoda, along with 3 comrades he was originally stationed with, lived entirely off the damp earth. They foraged for wild bananas and coconuts. When the hunger got to be too much, they'd actually sneak down into local farms to steal rice, where they'd hunt wandering cows and then dry the meat out in the sun so it lasts for months. It was an absolute masterclass in extreme wilderness survival. But as you can imagine, that kind of extreme, prolonged isolation takes a really heartbreaking toll. Slowly, the relentless jungle environment and the endless waiting broke his team apart. In 1949, one of his men, Akatsu, just couldn't take it anymore, and he surrendered to the local Philippine forces. 5 years later, in 1954, his comrade Shimada was killed during a shootout with a search party. And then tragedy strikes again in 1972 when his very last companion, Kozuka, is shot and killed. So by 1974, Hiro Onoda is completely crushingly alone. He's a solitary soldier fighting an invisible army.
We also have to take a step back and impartially look at the tragic human cost of all this. The number 30. That represents the local Philippine civilians and police officers who lost their lives. Because Onoda firmly believed he was still operating deep behind enemy lines, he genuinely viewed the local islanders as enemy combatants or spies. Over those 29 years, he and his men killed over 30 locals and injured more than 100 others in various night raids and ambushes. It's a profoundly tragic consequence of his misguided, unwavering loyalty.
Section 4. The Adventurer and the Soldier. Enter Norio Suzuki.
Over the years, the Japanese and Philippine governments tried literally everything to get Onoda out. They dropped letters, family photos, they even flew planes with loudspeakers blasting his own brother's voice, pleading with him to come home. And Onoda just dismissed all of it as enemy propaganda. But, and this is where the story takes a wild turn, where highly trained military search missions completely failed, a 24-year-old Japanese college dropout and adventurer actually succeeded. His name was Norio Suzuki. And you honestly gotta love the eccentric ambition of this guy. He wasn't a soldier. He famously told his friends he was leaving Japan to travel the world with 3 very specific life goals. Number 1, see a wild panda. Number 2, find the mythical Yeti. And number 3, find Lieutenant Haruo Onoda. Against all rational odds, Suzuki goes to the Lubang jungle, sets up camp, and his sheer audacity actually works.
On February 20th, 1974, these two men actually cross paths. Now, Onoda initially raises his rifle, fully ready to fire at this intruder. But Suzuki is quick. He shouts out in Japanese, "Onoda-san, the Emperor and the people of Japan are worried about you." So they sit down, they talk. Suzuki explains that Japan is this massive economic powerhouse now, and that the war has been over for decades. But Onoda's conditioning is just too deep. He flat out tells Suzuki, no way. He refuses to surrender or hand over his weapons unless his specific commanding officer comes to the island and personally gives him the order to stand down.
Section 5. Ending the Private War and Major Taniguchi's return. So Suzuki heads back to Japan with photographs to prove Onoda is actually alive, and it sparks this massive media frenzy. The Japanese government goes into absolute overdrive to find Onoda's former commander. Remember, it's been 29 years, but they find him. Major Yoshimi Taniguchi had retired a long time ago and was just quietly working as a bookseller. They quickly brief him, dress him up in his old military uniform, and fly him straight to Lubang Island to break the spell he had cast nearly 3 decades ago. I want you to imagine this reunion. Onoda, who's now 52 years old, steps out of the jungle foliage. The second he sees his old commander, he snaps to attention and delivers a perfect, crisp salute. Major Taniguchi pulls out a piece of paper and reads the official decree. Japan has lost the war. The imperial mission is canceled. You are ordered to lay down your weapons. And in that exact moment, the 29-year psychological chain just snaps. Onoda openly wept as he finally handed over his functioning Arisaka rifle, 500 rounds of ammo, and his ceremonial sword.
Onoda returned to Japan as this massive national hero. But man, the culture shock he experienced was staggering. Think about it. He had left a fiercely nationalistic, highly militarized empire in 1944. The country he stepped back into in 1974 was completely alien. It was deeply westernized, heavily driven by consumer tech, skyscrapers everywhere, and just a totally different set of values. He found himself really struggling, totally unable to adjust to this frantic modern society that had just moved on without him. So seeking that quiet connection to nature he had known for so long, Onoda actually left Japan the very next year. He emigrated to Brazil to raise cattle, and he did eventually find some peace there. In a really remarkable gesture of reconciliation, he even returned to Lubang Island years later, in 1996. He donated $10,000 to the local community to fund scholarships, trying to make some amends for the pain he unknowingly caused. Hiro Onoda eventually passed away from heart failure in Tokyo in 2014, living to the remarkable age of 91. Hiro Onoda's story is just one of the most astonishing examples of human endurance and the terrifying power of absolute, unquestioning loyalty. He successfully executed the ultimate war of survival against the absolute harshest elements nature could throw at him. Yet, in doing so, he sacrificed the best years of his life, his youth, and his friends, all to fight a phantom enemy that hadn't existed for decades. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this to ponder. By holding out for 29 years, did Hiro Onoda conquer time, or did time ultimately conquer him? It's a question that really makes you rethink.